thank you very much, and to all the commissioners for inviting me to testify today. There certainly has been a dramatic shift in U.S. public, policymaker, and even press perceptions with respect to U.S.-China trade since I sat in this room during the China PNTR debate in 2000. Since then, workers and communities across the country have suffered the loss of 70,000 U.S. manufacturing facilities and have seen the jobs that once supported middle-class lives lost, as well as the tax bases that support their communities. Other Americans experienced through the stress tests of COVID-19 that we no longer can make in this large, powerful country essential goods that we need in a crisis, nor get them in a resilient and ready way. Others have focused on the national security implications of this hollowing out of our economy. Under any circumstances, this has left us more vulnerable and weaker and overly dependent on hollow, week-long supply chains, particularly with respect to being very over-reliant on China. My documentation of these claims of the damage, I urge you to look at my written testimony, and particularly a lot of data that we prepared for the ITC's review on supply chains a year ago, which are available also on tradewatch.org, that document the concentration of production, starting in 1999 and decade by decade, showing the concentration with respect to China, but also the shift towards imports and lack of U.S. capacity. My written testimony is long, and I will summarize 4 main points. First, agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was ever so slightly modified to become the CPTPP, are exactly the model that's gotten us into this mess in the first instance. The United States definitely should not consider joining the CPTPP, but rather needs to create a new model. And in fact, it's perverse in a way to think about the CPTPP as a way to deal with our China concerns, which are very real. Because in many of the specific provisions of that agreement, there are enormous benefits for China. For instance, under the CPTPP, a car can enter the US duty-free, were we a member, despite it having 55% Chinese content, it having 45% Vietnamese content, and China not being a member of said agreement. Chinese state-owned enterprises and foreign direct invested firms, as well as People's Liberation Army firms, could get a waiver of Buy American procurement policies and get into the U.S. enormous procurement market, as well as having investor-state dispute resolution rights over the U.S. government and skirt our courts to attack our domestic laws. In addition, the arguments made with respect to foreign policy about getting into the TPP are identical to those that were made about China PNTR and have been disproved. And I urge the commissioners to look at the annex in my testimony to look at 12 pages of side-by-side, almost word-for-word promises of what would happen with PNTR, why we needed to get in, and then the same words for TPP, but the evidence of what really happened. Number 2, the premises and provisions of the TPP approach need to be altogether replaced with rules designed to promote, not to undermine, explicit goals. And it is a hopeful moment we've arrived at where U.S. trade policy is increasingly being considered on the basis of goals first, rules second, as compared to just repeating the same rules over and over, as has happened for generations, decades, on a bipartisan basis. The goals that we need to seek are those that include employment and good wages, resilient supply chains, domestic economic security and infrastructure strength, our climate challenges, public health, and other goals. Rebuilding U.S. economic security is going to require new trade rules, but also domestic changes. What clearly cannot be the case is shifting from over-reliance on China to over-reliance on, say, Vietnam is not going to solve our problem. We need domestic capacity, and we need to diversify our import sources. Number 3, We need to overcome what is a push to try and resell the same old as new. And in my testimony, I describe both the threat of the current digital trade rules, which do not deal with the real problems of mass imports of goods purchased online being delivered in small packages, of which 2 million daily are arriving from China by air express under the current de minimis program, uninspected, skirting the ban on Uyghur forced labor and numerous other U.S. programs and policies. That's a real e-commerce digital trade problem. In contrast, these agreements effectively are designed to put handcuffs on domestic policymakers with respect to gig economy workers' rules. They conflict with the anti-monopoly, pro-competition policies of the Biden administration with respect to the big tech monopolists. They undermine privacy. They undermine security of data. These are another stalking horse of special interest agendas being pushed as if it were pro-trade. Similarly, I would love to have the opportunity to discuss the RCEP, which is much more of a brand than a trade agreement. I actually brought the index of it and went through of all of the chapters that are not enforceable and what is in them, but the core changes, rules of origin. It's an agreement on trade only and not mainly agriculture trade covered at all among countries that already have duty-free amongst themselves. And then finally, thinking forward with respect to the IPEF, the process should be guided by 4 key principles. Those principles are, number 1, there must be goals, then rules, focusing on the goals I've enumerated. Number 2, our values and our standards must be the basis. This is a new model of trade agreements. We will have to lead on this. Number 3, we must pick the right partners. The IPEF neighborhood would not necessarily be the most friendly for this agenda, but it is the one for other reasons that we face. And finally, a transparent and inclusive process. Thank you very much.